people that haven't signed on, so if that's you, if you could do that throughout the session, that would be great. Vache, who is the fourth member on our panel, is just running a few minutes like he's in traffic, but we'll get started because I want to be mindful of our time today and make sure that you have time for the workshop this afternoon. So I'm Rebecca West and I'm one of the assistant principals here at Bonnyrigg Public School. It's my substantive position. I'm currently relieving as the primary advisor at Futures Learning, but I'm very grateful to be back for the day. I have a very supportive principal here who has said absolutely, we'll want to make sure this professional learning continues today. Just in terms of organisation, we've got the doors here and here. If there's an emergency, we just go out through the top to the collar area and walk out together. There's toilets just outside this door here. Please feel free to go and use it as needed, and help yourself to water, drinks, tea, coffee throughout today as well. There was a booklet that you should have all had a copy of. I think there are some spares floating around over here if you didn't get one. Feel free to use that to make notes or anything. You'll see on the first page on the inside that there are the Twitter handles for people that have Twitter from here today, and thank you Daniel, who's going to be hashtagging for us today under Big School. So if you want to follow that chat afterwards, or if you want to contribute to it today, you can use Twitter to do that. Starting off for today, I would like to pay respect to the Gabbargal people, who are the traditional custodians of the Darug Nation on which we meet. It is upon their ancestral land that Bonnyrigg Public School is built. I respectfully acknowledge the elders of the past, present and future, for they hold the memories, the tradition, the culture and the hopes of Aboriginal Australia. I want to thank you for coming today, particularly this afternoon on this nice hot day for the panel and workshop session. It's really good to see people eager to collaborate and network, especially around this topic, which is something that is quite dear to me. I need to thank Daniel in terms of this, because when I really wanted to establish something to broach out into this area of transition to school, I wasn't really sure when to start. And last year Daniel held a panel very similar to this, and the buzz that it generated in the room was just so invigorating. I thought that's a really good way to get conversation going and to be able to meet people from other networks or other schools. And really that's what we miss out on as teachers, just being able to meet with each other and talk. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to go with the panel and workshop scenario. On a professional note, so my PDP goals this year, one is to enhance transition to secondary education for students, teachers, leaders and community. And another goal is to provide comprehensive and purposeful professional development for staff on innovative, evidence-based pedagogies and practices. So today I'm kind of hoping to work towards two goals in one by facilitating this today. I coordinated this session because of my own experiences working across primary and secondary sectors. So I worked in a central school, Mary War Central School, which was in a very small town of only 1,000 people. The school itself had about 250 students K to 12, and we were on separate sites. So the town very much saw the schools as a primary school and a high school, when we were in fact a central school. So while working there, it was a very big process to build the relationships between teachers, between students and ultimately our community as well. And the results just had the best benefits you could imagine. And I wanted to, I guess, extend that to people that I connect with as well, because the benefits were just amazing. It's become a natural extension for me now to work in networks and collaborate between primary and secondary, and it doesn't feel any different to me now to be working with those people. So for today's panel, I wanted to get a variety of perspectives and opinions. So to start off with, I'd like to introduce Amy, who is our school psychologist here at Bonnyrigg Public School, and she's also the psychologist over at Bonnyrigg High School. So she's got the very unique experience of getting to work with our students from year 6 to year 7 and just staying with them through that journey as they change. And it's good for us, we get to get feedback on how our kidlets are going, and it's good because when they go over, she has that knowledge of the history that they've had behind them. So could you please help me in welcoming Amy to the panel today? Vache's not here yet, but I'll introduce him anyway so you know who he is. So he is a self-proclaimed boom and fizzle enthusiast, as you'll see on your booklet there. He's a science teacher. He has experience in both public and independent sectors, and he's worked extensively on transition programs. I invited Vache because of his ability to collaborate across primary and secondary. I first met him at a conference, and I couldn't tell what his background was, because the session that he was running, he was working with primary, with secondary, with kindy teachers, with year 12 teachers, and he had the knowledge and understanding and just really that enthusiasm that went with all of those. It wasn't until I actually got into a conversation with him later that I found out he was the primary advisor. He's now at Newington College, and when he gets here he'll be giving us information about his experiences in that regard, so we can welcome him when he comes later. Next on our panel though is Karen Endicott. So Karen is our senior leader on the panel, and she's currently the award-winning principal of Sarah Redfern High School, and I wanted to bring her onto the panel for a number of reasons, but the main one was pretty much because how she's used innovative practices to support students, teachers and parents to create a whole new culture around the transition to high school. She'll go into more detail about that. I won't do that, but could you please welcome Karen to the panel today? And last but not least, we've got Eddie Wu joining us today, the man who has identified himself as a primary teacher in a secondary teacher's body. So you might think his extensive list of accomplishments is why I've asked him here today, but it's really not. I was introduced to Eddie by Daniel and Dave, who's at the back there. You can meet Dave later. And I don't think we've ever actually finished a conversation because they just keep continuing when we go and we'll pick up when we've left it. And it's just really indicative of the fact that we're all on the same wavelength on those things that we're working towards. We were talking before about relationships, and pretty much that regardless of whether we're a primary practitioner or a secondary practitioner, we all acknowledge that one simple truth, and that's relationships matter. Relationships come first. So it doesn't hurt to have one of the top 10 teachers in the world sitting with us today, but could you please welcome Eddie to the panel? Okay, so I'm going to move straight into the questions today, and I've got you sections in your books there in case you want to make any notes about anything, or if you think of a question that you'd like to ask the panel at the end. Here he is, please welcome Butcher! I gave you a really good introduction.
Sorry I'm late. I heard that 2018 was the year of being factually late.
That's okay, we've only just started now, so we're getting into our questions. So yeah, if you've got a question that you'd like to ask the panel later, just jot it down and we'll be able to do that once we finish the workshop section. I'm going to have the questions up here for you as well, and I'm just going to display them. Okay, so the first question we're going to direct to the panel today is, what are the most significant barriers you have seen students face in building relationships and coping in their first year of high school? And I'm going to start with Eddie this time.
Cool. Thanks, Beck. And also, hi everyone. It's awesome seeing such an active and committed group of teachers of an afternoon where it's kind of like it's Easter is calling. So it's fantastic to see all of you dedicated enough to be here. In thinking about this question, the first thing I have to do is not answer the question. Sorry, Beck, because it's really important that I frame an answer to this question about significant barriers by pointing out that by and large, children do an amazing job of overcoming every barrier that gets thrown their way. It's for me, especially having a 4, 7 and 9-year-old and being a little nervous about that looming high school transition, which you might think that I'm really comfortable with, but totally different, as many of you would know, having your own kids go through that. It's incredible, the resilience they demonstrate in overcoming an amazing range of different things. But Becky didn't ask that question to get a flowery answer about how well kids do. You wanted to hear about some of the barriers. So I've got 4 really quick fire ones that I'm sure we will touch on later in the conversation, but I'll just heading them for you, and maybe if we have time for questions later, you can hassle me. So the first one, I think, which is most obvious, is about students' self-identity. So I'll just, by way of illustration, I attended a selective school, and so it's so strange just not being, academics was my thing, and then just coming to a place where 119 people in my grade were 10 times smarter than I was, and I just didn't know who I was anymore. And whether it's academics or it's sport or being a public speaker or whatever it is, everyone gets put in that strange place of having to reform their own identity, and that's, along with hormones and all the rest of it, is very deeply confusing. The disruptiveness of multiple teachers is obviously pretty tough to cope with. I'll let Karen talk about proper middle school models that do this really amazingly, but at my school, it is not, sadly, that unusual for a Year 7 student to have 12 or 13 teachers on day one. Week one. That's pretty terrible. I hate that the vast majority of secondary schools, they timetable Year 12, and then Year 11, and then Year 10, and then poor Year 7 gets shoved in all the corners. I'd personally loved, and I know there are schools that do this, to do stage 6 and then go straight to Year 7, and we will work out everyone else and cope with their needs after that. But it's not the way most people do things, and so we get split classes, and that's really tragic and very difficult for many students to navigate. it's kind of ironic. We have lots of peer support structures, but that has this law of unintended consequences that actually, as the classroom teacher, we sometimes get very little face time in Year 7 because they're off doing peer support, going on excursions. Of course it has its worth, but sometimes that means in the first term, rather than seeing them 5 times 8, rather than seeing them 40 times, I might see them 30 times over the course of the 10 weeks, and each of those is really short, so that's its own challenge. And then lastly, I think you just get, every Year 7 kid just gets bombarded with this huge amount of information that they're required to deal with independently. And I got an email from a parent just last night actually that said, has Maths Pass, which I'll talk about later, has Maths Pass peer tutoring started yet? And my child's wondering. I said, it started 4 weeks ago, and we've been putting daily notices in the news every day, and we expect children to adapt to that independent, bringing in of all of what's going on in the school. So those are all just headings. I'm sure there are lots more that we'll get to, but they're a bit of a spattering of things that make it challenging.
Definitely, and actually you've opened up my eyes to a couple of things there in terms of timetabling. I've forgotten that that priority goes up first for different reasons.
Barriers. I think one of the things that we did successfully was we identified through research some of the barriers that were happening with students transitioning from Year 6 to Year 7. So we actually looked at the research and looked at what it was that was causing these students anxiety and stress. And it's exactly right, Eddie, some of those things that they have 14 teachers. So our structure, which is really quite unique, is that we actually I have a head teacher middle school, basically, and that is Marg Downey, who I know she will be happy to answer any of your questions. But our structure is we're a really low socio-economic school, and our children were coming in with literacy and numeracy levels way below state average. So one of the things that we identified was that these children couldn't access the curriculum. So what we actually did was we put a structure in place where we have teachers who have nominated to take these students for English, History, Geography, and they teach the unit under a concept. And it is all about how students learn. And one of the models that we use through our school is known as format. Now, format is a structure, it's a coat hanger to hang pedagogy. And it's a very successful coat hanger that secondary teachers can relate to because they can actually understand how children learn. Now, I'm very conscious it is not to do with learning styles, it is not to do with anything like that. It's about incorporating the types of learning that can engage all of the students. And I think that's really important. The other thing that we find is some of the students, because of their family background or in some cases because of their lack of social skills, actually don't know how to deal with conflict. So what we actually do is we do a whole lot of learning around respect, responsibility and positive behaviour learning. And that is a focus of our school. That basically children are asked when they make a mistake or when they have an issue, how do you fix it? Because quite often, because of their undeveloped frontal lobe, unfortunately, they don't know how to fix a problem. By having the one teacher for literacy, which is, as I said, English, History, Geography, and maths or numeracy, which is maths and science, Year 7 have 2 teachers. They have 2 teachers for the majority of time. They then go out for their electives. These students have a block. They have their own block where the middle school head teacher is there, their teachers of literacy and numeracy are there, and their year advisors, year coordinators are there. So these students have at least 3 people that they can call on. Every child in Year 7 and Year 8 have an individual learning plan. So what we actually look at is where the child is at when they come to us and where we need to move them to. And I think that's really important, because if I don't do that in Year 7 and 8, or not me, but the teachers don't do that, how is that child going to progress when we go to Stage 5? Because we're unique again in that we have Stage 5 curriculum, we don't have Years 9 and 10. So for us, basically, we look at their social, emotional and their learning, their academic skills. And I think that's really important. We look at the whole child and not just around, their academics or whatever. So,
and identifying that not being able to cope with that conflict is always a big one, because the conflict will change when they come from those environments. Just changing environments will change the conflict that you come with as well. Hello, Mavache. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Sorry for being late once again, guys. First of all, this just is a personal thing. How good does it feel to be back in the West? I actually grew up about a few streets away from here. So to be back in my home suburb where I know my parents are, who may be expecting me to come home for dinner tonight, but don't tell them I'm here. And even the primary school I went to is just the next suburb down the road. It actually feels amazing to be back in the southwest. So just good feelings all around. But we'll go to the question. So the significant barriers that our students are facing, and I'm going to talk from a high school perspective, from the school that I taught in as well, as long as also the school I'm in now. What aren't Year 7s facing when they come into high school? There are so many things that they're challenged with. All of a sudden they're in so many classes, they've got about 8 teachers or so many teachers, they've got periods, they're running from bell to bell, they're sitting down, they're barely standing up, and with all that we're expecting them to finish their homework, come to class on time and do everything we expect them to do. So I'm going to mirror a lot of things that Karen and Eddie said as well, because they're great strategies that we use all the time. And a school I came from before was a low socioeconomic school, so we had students who didn't have literacy and numeracy levels that we expected. So we were starting from scratch in terms of where they were. So one of the things that we did is, again, looking at research, looking at the data that our students had, what they came from primary school, is we saw that, again, reading levels were quite low, and we expected them to write in Year 7. I'm going to talk about science because it's the best subject in the world. It's the subject I teach. So we come into science, we say to the kids, okay, we're going to write a method, it's going to be very easy, it's going to be just like a recipe. And they look at you and they go, what's a recipe? And you go, oh, it's this recipe, it's ordered in 1, 2, 3, you'll know how to do it, just do it. And they look at you so blank and so vacant, expecting you to tell them what to do. So we ascertained very quickly that our students needed to be able to read to be able to gain meaning. So before they were writing and writing these methods and conclusions that we expected from Year 7s, we would start from that very beginning, where it would be about those reading skills and all that. And one of the biggest barriers that students were facing was these literacy and numeracy barriers as they came into high school. Because the expectations in the syllabus, Stage 4, is quite high. We expect students to be able to write quite effectively in many genres, many text types, and that's just in science, let alone the other subjects that they're sitting in as well. So we did a whole school thing where we looked at literacy and tried to run that whole school. So every staff room, all the major faculties, were using the meta language, we're using literacy strategies in all their classes. So a student that went from an English class to a science class would have the same language. So when I use the word verb and adverb for the first time, I had kids saying, you're not an English teacher, so seriously, we need to blow something up. But what happened was, as we went along, they were understanding that this language they were using was the same and mirrored in all their classes, and it was something that really allowed them to be able to build up their reading skills, but again, we're working on their writing skills as well. So a reading framework that allowed them to learn, allowed them to gain meaning, so then they could write, which is really effective. The positive behaviours in learning, the positive behaviours in school that we talk about that Karen mentioned, I think is very important. The students are coming into a new environment. High school is big school. It's a very, very different place for all our students. So that positive behaviours, talking about those expectations, is really important. That allows students to understand where they are. But the one thing that I wanted to mention that really could bring in students together is something called mentorship. And I know we have the buddy system as well with peer support and all that. What we don't have is someone the kids can liaise with at all times. Weekly sessions where kids see the same student or the same teacher, and they're that point of call. So if anything does happen in that student's lives, if they have a few strategies, lost my words. If they have a few issues that they're dealing with at home, even at school, in regards to homework, in regards to what they're doing in the classroom, friendships, which is so important for our students in Year 7, that mentorship is really important to provide that base or that home that they can always go to. And whether that looks like a homeroom, or whether that looks like a weekly mentoring session, or even if it is using our Year 11s in a leadership role to be able to build that capacity, they all work. So for me, it's all about, again, looking at data, looking at where we can help our students, what barriers they have in terms of their learning, but also looking at barriers, those social barriers that they come into school with. And that mentorship could be something that's really important and could work quite well.
Trust you, Vache, to turn it around on me instead of saying what are the most, just saying what aren't they facing. It sums it up pretty much, isn't it? Okay, Amy.
Okay, so for me, it's all about welfare. When I think Year 6 to Year 7, instantly I think the word anxiety. I think because I've heard it from parents, students, Year 6 teachers who know their kids are leaving. It's just, I think, the biggest problem. So I thought, what can I do that all of these really successful people can't do? Is that we have a Year 7 group of 275 who have just made this transition. So I thought, I'm going to ask them. I'm going to get some data from them. So 63%, right? So Year 7 still think surveys are very cool, so that was in my favour. So 230 completed them. So in their roll call time. So they had a choice. They all wanted to give information. 63% identified being worried or anxious about starting high school. I asked them before school, so not now, about going to school, how they felt at the end of Year 6. So that's pretty significant for me. There were comments about physical symptoms they were experiencing. They were nauseous, they had headaches, obviously a lot of emotional things going on as well. So I thought, okay, well, we know it's a problem, but actually a little bit higher than I thought. And then trying to, I guess, tackle this juicy question, I just went with connection. I think the most significant barrier is connection. Everything changes. We have new teachers, we have new peers, we have new classrooms, new office ladies. Like these really minor things that I get told every day, like, where do I pay my money? Like it's these minor changes. You mentioned daily notices. What's a daily notice? Like there's all these new things that we go, just check the daily notices, and they're like, I have no idea what that is. So identifying those little things, then you get really academic with the verbs and stuff. For me, that's a completely different thing. I'm just, really basic. So 40% of students said that they were anxious about making new connections, leaving their teachers, leaving their friends. And a lot of them left most of their friends. So females, bigger problem. Our females seem to struggle a lot with new friendships in Year 7. Research suggests that, in my experience, that's certainly true. Don't know about you guys, I mean, some nods, they find it very difficult. It's been touched on a little bit, but new teachers, not having connection to a classroom. Where am I going to put my bag? Like these kids have to carry their bag all day. Like these minor little things that are really anxiety provoking, carrying all their books, really little things. So it's lacking that connection at first to anything. They were the biggest things, I guess. Also a lot of fear about what high school is. All of these really negative perceptions, and I did a pre and post, so thank goodness they're all gone now, most of them. But all of these negative perceptions about high school is scary. Students identified that you're more likely to get bullied in high school, it's more likely to be violence, all of these really scary things that they have these negative perceptions of. And most of them, 95%, 95.6%, those perceptions went down once they started high school. So it's all that, I guess, the false beliefs about what high school is, I think is a really significant barrier as well. Just to name a few.
The fact that you said office staff.
Office staff,
Our students in primary, they do develop that really good relationship sometimes with our office staff and just leaving them as well.
Yeah.
That would be, didn't even consider that one.
Can I just say, one of the things that we overcame that anxiety is we actually have a community of schools where we run something which is called an Endicott Cup. Yes, it's named after myself. But what it is each term we run these competitions. So you think you can paint, so you think, Master Chef, etc. And what we actually do is, on an afternoon, the teachers come in and we prepare all these learning activities, and the students actually compete. Who's the best chef, who's the best painter, and then at the end of the year, they end up getting the big Endicott Cup. So they have actually been in all the specialist areas. They've met most of their teachers that they're going to be engaged with, and they're actually, when they walk into the school, they are walking around going, "Oh, hi miss, how are you?" etc. And that was really, really good. But now what we've done is we have started it in year 3. So we actually have an Endicott Cup for those kids in stage 2 that are coming into our high school, and they are competing in these competitions and becoming familiar with what is going on in the school. And it works really well. And we have even, during Education Week, we have nearly, 25 primary schools that come to us just to do the academic challenge, and they see how it operates for the day during Education Week. So they get familiar with what a high school looks like and realise that high school teachers aren't really that scary, that we're really nice
Speak for
people.
yourself, Karen. I'm very intimidated.
And I think that's really important because they don't know and they're not familiar. And so if you can sort of make them feel at ease, and their parents, the first time they come, they go, "Oh yes, we've heard about high school." But by the time they're there 4th term, they're there cheering for their kids in the Endicott Cup, and it just breaks down those barriers. So
we had that conversation today about just how much of an impact you can make by just being somewhere different, just by turning up and being in that different environment, that it can do that.
I think something Amy said as well is really important was talking about kids, where I put my bag, things like that, or even new office ladies. I know as a teacher, the first rule is know your office lady so you get all the good things.
exactly.
It was the same as a kid when I was at school as well. Know your office ladies, they'll treat you well. But something to be said is something that kids react to is inconsistency, and they will judge us all the time when we're inconsistent with the way we behave. But even in terms of consistency within the school, I know I walked in one day to my year 7 class with glasses on and lost them for 50 minutes because they couldn't handle the change.
Vache, you should have seen after lunch, after I did Shave for a Cure, nothing was that lesson.
So even that school environment as well, if there's a consistency there, I know in a high school environment, even a primary school environment, there are so many inconsistencies, and we just call that the dynamic nature of school. That's always there, but a way to keep the year 7s at ease, or even get them to understand that these things do occur. So again, I'm going to go back to things like that mentorship, that positive behaviours in schools really do allow kids to be able to talk about what's happening and having these healthy conversations with a person who can always be there for them.
Okay, just being mindful of time, I'm going to go to the second question. So in this question, I'm going to ask you guys to kind of put on your hats when you're answering this one. So Eddie, 2 hats as that head teacher, innovative leader. Karen, in terms of principal and that networking role that you have. Vache as a classroom teacher and also deliver of professional learning. And Amy continuing with that welfare, well-being sort of frame of mind when we're answering this one. Which is, what role do or should we as educators and leaders play in guiding students, teachers and community throughout the successful transition of our students to year 7?
Okay, I'll start off. I'm mainly, just for the sake of context, I'm mainly going to be wearing my faculty head teacher hat for this one because I think it's the most relevant to the question. I'm also going to cheat slightly and blur in half of an answer from the previous question that Amy prompted me to remember, which is that I don't know how many of you are particularly familiar with the Tell Them From Me survey, which has some questionable aspects at best, but a lot of it is incredibly valuable data. One of the things that stood out to me most was the information about students' self-identification of belonging. And it's a downward trend, all the way from 5 down to about 11, and then at last, it picks up just a teeny bit at the end. And by way of answering the second question, what's our teacher's role, what's our role as staff in ensuring that successful transition happens? Well, we need to get students to move from, mathematical metaphor for you, we need to move them from a concrete sense of belonging to a more abstract one. It is no longer a physical place and a spot that I put my bag. That's where I belong. That's this classroom. It's going to be something it's going to be based on relationship. It's going to be based on my new formation of who I am in this school and what I love and the things that I really enjoy doing, whether it's extracurricular activities or academic stuff or whatever it happens to be. So they need to reinvent their own sense of what does it mean to belong. It doesn't just mean being in the same place with the same people, doing the same things. It becomes something quite different. So let me try and paint you a picture of that. As a faculty head teacher, the first thing has to be about continuity of curriculum. And it should be an obvious thing, but I've talked to enough teachers in enough places to know that it's not as obvious as it sounds. For example, we went through an update of the K-10 mathematics and English, all the core subjects syllabuses, not that long ago. And when that change was made, secondary schools and primary schools, in my experience also, basically looked at the update and said, what is the least we can do to our programs to fit what we used to do into these new descriptors and new syllabus dot points, because we're all tired and exhausted and have a million different things that keep us busy, let alone having to update the way that we teach. But we have to, because all of a sudden we find ourselves speaking, as Vacho was pointing out, a whole different language within a KLA. And that's just disastrous for kids. We find that, it's awful to think about it this way, but children tend to sort of survive the mathematical gauntlet like a funnel, right? They get to times tables. If they survive that, then they can get to fractions, and if they survive that, then they'll get to algebra and then to calculus. And this tiny little proportion down the bottom who survived all of those, rigorous challenges. And we have that problem because every time someone makes a transition, whether it's from primary to secondary or from IB to New South Wales, Boston, Nessa, whatever they're calling themselves this week, and they make that transition, or when they move from school to school, secondary to secondary, or from overseas to here, every time that transition happens, we lose people because that language and that continuity has been lost. And that's why meetings like this is so important. So we need to establish that. Secondly, even though we often view it as a crutch, as a problem, there's a real value in having a diversity of teachers for every student. Cherrybrook Technology High School is a large school, so we have just about 2,000 kids, which means 135 teaching staff. That obviously presents problems, as we've alluded to already, but there's something really wonderful about the fact that whoever you are, you'll connect to someone here in a really amazing, fundamental way. And that's great. You'll find your place. For me, it was my agriculture and music teachers when I was in year 7, which was interesting because I was not good at either of those subjects, but it didn't matter to those teachers. They connected with me, I got them, and I found a place. The last thing that I'll probably mention requires a slide. So. Yes. Making sure that we equip students to flourish from a faculty head teacher point of view means that we put structures in place. And structures are not everything. Structures only exist to serve people, and when they stop serving people, the structures have to go. But structures are really good and really helpful. That's why we invent them all the time. So in my school, this is what I hand out at our Year 6 into 7 open night. So I want every student and every parent to know when they come in, wherever they are in their mathematical journey, we have something that will equip them to flourish. Wherever you are on, I've loathed this subject my entire life and always struggled with it. Or I have dyscalculia. You know about dyscalculia? Dyslexia for numbers? I'm there. Or I'm... what was his name? Lindsay in year 6, who was watching me do card tricks today that I'm all mathematical, and he's just going, and he wants extension and acceleration and enrichment. And wherever you are, we have something to help you. I kind of view structures a bit like a crutch. I'd love it if I didn't have to have any structures because sometimes they get in the way. But what these structures help me do, whether they're support structures or enrichment structures, they sort of are there to ensure that my teachers don't have to be trying to, don't forget, just like the students are learning 8 to 10 new teachers' names, in a high school, we're learning 120 to 150 different names and faces. And it's really hard getting that whole, in a class of 30, just like you do, we learn the 5 who are troublesome, and we learn the 5 who always have their hand up, and then the 20 in the middle just somewhat get lost. And so these structures assist us to make sure there's something that provides them assistance, whichever direction they need to go in. So those are the kinds of things which I view as the role that head teachers and faculty specialists need to play.
And if you want a more detailed definition about maths pass, that is on YouTube too as well. And it's a really good video to watch. It just goes into detail, and it's got the kids actually talking about the program, which I think is the most impactful part, is just watching the kids say how great it is. Karen?
From a principal's point of view, I think too often we forget that the children are learners, and it's our job to engage them in the process of learning. I am really passionate about that, in that, because if a child can open up to an opportunity to learn, as you say, in mathematics, science, history, geography, and we actually focus on how that child learns and how that child learns best, and also how sometimes we can actually put the challenge there for the child to move forward. I think too often our structures get too tied up with, and I say that from a secondary perspective, we get too tied up with those structures and the 8-period day, the certain around the teachers and whatever. My focus is on the students, how they learn and how I can make their learning best. So we put middle school on first, we then put year 12 on, and basically we look at timetabling a whole different way about what is the best for our learners and what is the best for these students achieving. And it was really interesting because when, and Marg would remember, when we first started the middle school, basically teachers, well, we're not teaching, we're not going that, we're not, blah, blah, etc. And it was really interesting, their response. Now, honestly, I have to stop people once they get involved and they see how the kids connect with them and how the kids respond. Like the Tell Them From Me survey, most of our children in year 7, as far as their engagement, they are at 91%, and in stage 5 they're at 89%. Now that is absolutely amazing in a secondary school, and our year 12s are even higher, and it is all about, because we focus on the child as a learner, and I think that that's, from a principal's point of view, changing that culture and the way of thinking is really, really difficult. But I do believe that we have made that transition.
And changing a culture is something that you need to have that long-term plan for as well. It's definitely not something that happens overnight.
That's right, yeah.
Bache.
I wholeheartedly agree with Karen. That's the crux of what I was saying. So in terms of, let's go down to that classroom setting where we all sit and where we can make the most change within our students. It's a very important one that we do play as well. It's engaging our students in learning, and anything that involves year 7s and them adapting to an environment needs to have something to do with their learning and their engagement. I think as classroom teachers, in terms of what we facilitate and what we guide, is we guide other teachers as well in that same plan, that in terms of us developing something for our students in year 7 to be able to cope with these challenges of high school. But at the same time, even if we're talking about transition into big school or into high school, but how they're doing that effectively. So it is a team effort. And I think with most things that we do, whether it's programming, whether it's looking at whole school plans, or even looking at our school plans, it is all about getting everyone together. So it is the whole teamwork and collaboration does make it happen indeed. In terms of how we guide our year 7s, it's essentially making them feel that school is about being a safe environment for learning and for them, and that's really important in year 7, that we are really looking at guiding our students to acknowledging and knowing that school is a very, very safe place for them, that they can do anything there, and we are there to support them in that, support them in their learning. And by doing anything there, I just mean having fun and learning, not anything else on the side. So again, something where they can feel safe, something where they feel like they belong, again back to what Eddie was saying as well. The community is a bit of a tricky one with this, because it depends on the school you're in, it depends on your environment, it depends on a lot of things, whether the community is involved or even invested in what's happening in that school. We know that parents invest quite highly in their students. We know that there are some parents that don't, depending on where you are. And I was in a school setting where we had a mixture of both. Some parents didn't want to buy over, other parents were there every day wanting to know what they could do. So involving parents, I think, is one of the strongest things that we can do in transition with year 7, that they're involved from the start. And from the start is at that stage 3 level, working at year 6. There are some studies that say that transition at year 6 may be a little bit too late, because by about year 4, a parent has already chosen where the student's going to go. A child has told their parent where they want to go, and they already know what they want to be when they were young. When I was in year 4, I wanted to be a fire truck. But I also knew the high school I was going to. So growing up in the local area as well, going to a school quite nearby, we'd already spoken about the next stage. My parents already started that with me.
Yep.
And that's when the selective high school test had started back in the 1990s. So trying to get us into those. So all of a sudden, there was a conversation in year 5, I remember, of the selective high school test. Being in the GAT class / OC class, depending what they felt like that year, was also the same conversations that started. What high school are you going to? So for our students, no matter where you're going to, whether it be a selective high school, whether it be a comprehensive high school, the conversations are starting very early. And it's important to get parents involved at a very early stage for them to understand that as students transit from that primary setting to the high school setting, they'll be there along their entire journey. And even in year 7, getting parents involved in what's happening. Open nights. Again, we had a very different one at our school. We had a information sheet that was sent home in regards to what was happening with our year 7s in most cases. We didn't really have parents attend. It was a very different school setting. In terms of year 6s, we had a school right next door to us. We shared a fence, but we barely did anything. It was only a few years down the track when we started to. So even though you are literally on the same ground, your kids can see each other, we were having issues with students coming across because we weren't helping each other as teachers. This is the very beginning of the journey. We weren't helping each other as teachers to be able to let our year 7s know what was going on. So they're telling everyone what year 7's like. That somehow trickles down to their brothers and their sisters who are going to the primary school next door. And all of a sudden, school isn't a safe, happy learning environment for everyone. So parents are the crux as well in terms of what we have to talk to, those conversations we have to have, and getting them more invested into their children's lives, because year 7 goes for that year, then you got year 8, year 9, year 10, 11, year 12, depending where you want to go. But it goes for quite a big chunk of their time. And by the time you graduate year 12, that's about 13 years of your life just to schooling. So when you finish year 12, that's almost what? Can you do the math for me? 18. So it's 13 over 18. No, I get this right. Yeah, 13 over 18.
13's prime, that's where it's going. That's it.
In science, we do science maths, it's totally different. And that's something I should talk about with transition. So for me, it's all about that. And what we facilitate overall, whether it be with parents, whether it be with the community, is we facilitate engagement first and foremost in learning. That school is a place that students are coming to for them to be able to engage in all the KLAs, mainly science first and the rest later. But that safe, that learning environment, I think is the most important, which is going to also lead us into the next question. So I'm not going to go through it now, but at this point, it's asking ourselves, what is transition? More so, before we say what's transition look like, what is transition? Is that the point from stage 3 to stage 4? Is it year 7s into high school? Is it that little gap between year 6 and year 7? And I think that will help us elucidate what we're talking about next in regards to what does transition look, feel and sound like.
Anyone else wanted to be a fire truck?
Just me?
I gotta love his honesty.
Yeah.
Amy.
Okay, so I think that we need to provide information and we need to provide emotional support from my position. A number of the stresses that students tell me every day revolve around fearing the unknown when they transitioned. So having no information or incorrect information about their high school. In common practice, when I work with anxiety, knowledge is power. Whether that's knowing their own thoughts, knowing information, I always fall back to when in doubt, knowledge is power. So back on that, the data I collected. So we know building connection was the number 1 fear. Second fear was getting lost or not being able to find my way around. So 18% of kids identified that was the biggest stressor for them coming to high school. When I was reading that, I thought, okay, so simply knowing the layout of the school, knowing where rooms were, would have minimized or eliminated some of that anxiety. So with that really simple thing, we could reduce it. Safe place, I think, just safe place. I said before, these negative perceptions of high school that kids feared that there was more bullying, that it was scary. And we've got to think, they go from playing with 5 and 6 year olds, right? And then they're in the playground with generally a larger number of kids.
Yep.
I think the comparison from here to, you know, the Bonnyrigg kids say to me, there's so many people. And it's true, there are a lot of people, and they're 17 and they're 18 years old. For some of them, that's the first time they've mixed with people at that age, so it's very scary. So I think if we can create that perception of a safe place, they've already got the perception that it's not. So starting there, I think, would be a really good idea. We've talked a little bit about how we can do it, and a big one is orientation days. I think that we already have. There's some really great ideas that have come up that I'm already like, yes, but something we already have in place, and I think most high schools that I've heard of do, is an orientation day. 94% of our Year 7s went to orientation day. Generally, they're term 4 when they're in Year 6. Ours was at Bonnyrigg High. 74% reported feeling more prepared and more confident at the end of that day. One day of, I think it was a full day, meeting each other, seeing the school, seeing the staff. That's massive, I think. In just one day, 6 hours, they felt far more confident. School connectedness, again, I know I've said it, but we have a psychological need to feel safe and connected. That's when we're going to get our engagement. That's when we're going to get friendships, when we feel safe. So I think for me, the sooner we can do that, the better. Now, students really did, anxiety levels are far lower. There's still some, can't get rid of it all, but it's a lot lower now than when they started week 1, when they're at the end of Year 6. They report feeling more connected, which is really great. And just on a bit of a different note, I think our role is we need to communicate. We need to communicate with each other. I've only been lucky enough to be working at Bonnyrigg Public here for, it's only 2 terms. It feels like longer. Term and a half, nearly 2 terms, which is the feeder school to my high school, my base high school. And it is such an advantage to be able to speak with staff on a more regular basis, transfer of information, it's so beneficial when we start. So we know, what do we have to target, what are our triggers, what are our learning difficulties, what are our behaviours. We know them week 1. We're not waiting till the end of term 1, term 2 to work out how we can implement plans, strategies, and really support these kids. So I know obviously not all schools have staff who work across both. Another practice I've heard is the transition meetings, I think they are, where the high school, primary school meet. So even information there, but providing as much information as you can, I think, is a big role for us as well.
And just on that note of communication as well, some students really need to be explicitly told this is a safe place. Just saying it out loud. You can actually say that and communicate. This is a safe classroom. I am here for you. You are safe here today. Just to reinforce that as well.
And I thought even those conversations, having them while they're still here, whether that's our Year 6 teachers having those conversations and selling it in a positive light, would be really powerful.
Can I just say, one of the things that I found really interesting, when I first went to Sarah Redfern High School, we only had 39 students coming to us from our primary schools, and the main reason that they weren't coming to us is that our actually primary colleagues, and I actually have Sarah Redfern Primary School on my site, but what happened was the primary school teachers actually weren't aware of what we were doing in the school and the processes that we actually had in place. I can actually say probably when I first went there was a little bit disjointed, and I probably would have agreed with most parents that I wouldn't have sent my child there either. But what we needed to do was we needed to reflect on ourselves and say, what is it that we need to do so that parents feel comfortable and teachers feel comfortable in recommending that they go to their local school. And so what we did was we invited the primary school teachers in and we said, tell us what your parents need, what are their concerns, and what do we need to address as a high school. And one of the things, successes for us was the fact that we are now getting children who are making our school a school of choice, and they're actually out of areas and I have to knock them back. because they can see that we really care for their child, and they can see that the schools are recommending go to your local school. It is a great school. So if you can have, and I think it's that connectedness and that communication between, and we do now we have a community of school meeting with the teachers, the principals meet, and we talk about projects that we're going to do together. We explore data, we explore children's learning, which I think is really important, that you actually get down to knowing those little Year 7 students coming in, identifying those that have those disabilities or those children who have those special needs, that we can cater for them and make them feel at home and comfortable. So, yeah.
Can I add one more thing as well? Just because I've got my, as a faculty head teacher, I'm always thinking, what would my staff think of this? And one of the things that's always really dangerous listening to a great set of ideas like this is, where am I going to find the time to do any of these things? Because all of these, we can recognise that they're good, but how are we going, how do you get an open night if you're, if your local school isn't doing something like that, or if an orientation, it's a huge amount of work. The thought that I have in my head is that in some ways, we don't have time not to do these things. Don't have time not to do these things. So, for example, in Year 7, the mathematics curriculum in Year 7 or Stage 4 is famously packed. We're just constantly going from topic to topic to topic. We feel like we have a week and a half max in something, and it's off we go to the next thing. And sometimes we can feel like, say the working mathematically ideas, we don't have time to focus on that and to actually invest in, because we've got topics and content to get through. Those syllabus dot points aren't going to teach themselves, and so we get on this manic treadmill, but we create a rod for our own backs in not actually properly developing those ideas in the first place. And when you hear about, say, these, ensuring that we're really fortunate at Cherrybrook that we've got 3 main feeders that give us amazing welfare information that allows us to pretty much first day have everyone's independent learning plan just ready to go, and we know everyone's needs, and we're just very gifted to have that. But imagine if we didn't, we would be creating a rod for our own backs and not investing the time to create that, because then you're just chasing your tail, wondering why Charlie is just always hot and bothered in class, and it's because he has ADHD and you're not giving him the right strategies in class. Why are you not investing the time earlier to ensure that the time you spend later focused on teaching and learning isn't actually going to be effective? So I guess if you feel like a normal human being and where am I going to find time for this, we have to find a time to carve out, because we can't not. We're just setting kids up for failure if we don't.
All right, the last question we're going to do really quickly before moving into the workshop, and we've touched on a lot of it today, so I think we'll just keep it really succinct. What does a successful transition look like, feel like, sound like? Short.
Sure, it's fair. That was subtle. Okay, I'll be very brief. I used to think that a good transition was so good that you didn't see it. That it was just did we transition? And here we are. And I sort of still somewhat subscribe to that view, that I would love it that kids didn't think of Year 7 as this big, dramatic, really sudden change that you have to be afraid of. But over the years, this is my 11th year teaching, I've sort of come to think that, I think that the primary secondary system and its division, while there are definite compromises as compared to, say, a central school, there are things that you can do really well when there's a primary secondary division, which every system's a compromise, right? It's about choosing your compromises. So my metaphor, what does it look like, is it's about being in your car and shifting to a higher gear, and you hear the engine sort of roar as you're trying to climb the hill, and it's supposed to do that. It's supposed to reckon with the fact that in mathematics we often say mathematicians are not people who find mathematics easy. It's people who actually enjoy how hard it is. Now, that's not getting better in a linear way. I'm just better at doing timetables now, and I've got more knowledge in my head, and I can just do things faster. Actually, it's a whole disposition change, and being able to switch gears into that and reckon with, we're treating you like you're in big school now, is actually a really wonderful. Students make that. I think we often put kids in cotton wool too much. So I love seeing that transition happen. It's hard, but they need support to negotiate it, and they do by and large. So that's what successful transition looks like to me.
I'm stealing that phrase too. So good you didn't see it. I'm going to be using that one.
Yeah.
Karen.
What does it look like? It looks like that the children are happy, smiling, and you actually see them so excited about their learning, and they're walking around the playground and they're going, and we did such and such, and did you learn such and such? And that's what, to me, successful transition is like, that they have they've made new connections, they've made new friends, and I see happy, smiling faces. Because when you see happy, smiling faces, they will learn. And so that's one of the things that we can talk about, all, certain structures, etc. But those structures have to support those learners. They have to be happy, smiling, and feeling content. Like it's home. They're part of the family.
Bate.
It looks like a science classroom.
Didn't see that one coming.
It feels like wow, and it sounds like the laughter of 1,000 children. But on the serious note, for me, transition is not about PR. PR is the last thing you want to do with transition, because transition isn't about how many kids are coming to your school. It's about getting those kids from year 6 into year 7 that are coming to your school. So for me, in transition programs in the past, it wasn't about those orientation days that we had. We had kids from 7, 8 feeder schools around the area. We had 3 schools we knew we weren't getting a single kid from, but we still ran them. We ran them because we knew it was this PR campaign we were doing. The most successful transitions we did was what I called bespoke transition programs, where we had the school right next to us, where we shared a fence with, and we did a 3-week program with them. The content was stage 3. We were doing what they were doing in their syllabus, but we were doing it in the high school context. We were giving them a feel of what the environment would be like. Again, that safe place from primary school to that safe place in high school. And that was what was quite nice about that. Now, with things like this, and back to what Eddie was saying, we are busy. There are so many things hitting us every day, and we have barely enough time to rewrite a program, let alone make a new transition. But getting those teachers involved, having someone responsible for a bespoke transition with this school or another bespoke transition with a school next to you, all you're doing is doing small little programs, doing their content, doing content and skills that we have in stage 3, but in that high school setting, getting them involved in what you're doing, getting them to move around in that lab, for example, in science, that can be so very anxious for our students because there are so many things that can hurt you in a science lab. So it's not about PR. It is all about learning when it comes to transition, making sure that it's not about, hey guys, touch this, feel that, and all of a sudden we're giving them all these buzz things to do. So things are sizzling, popping, fizzing, and it's so colourful with science because we add food dye with everything if you want to make it look. And so they're coming to the room and we have beakers all around the room and they've got water in them, but water's different colours because chemicals are colourful. And then they come to year 7 and we go, don't touch anything, we're doing stock take, glassware is breakable, but let's now draw a poster about what safety looks like. So we flip it around. So this orientation, which is meant to be this giant PR campaign, has flipped around on its head when we say, let's do a safety poster, guys. And there are so many ways to do that. The first thing in year 7 should be our fresco learning, what I like to call it. Get out in the environment, do a survey of what you can see. That's real science when you're doing surveying, as opposed to, hey guys, we've got all the glass around the room, let's name them. The last thing you want any year 7 student to do. And by the end of year 7, they still don't know a beaker's called a beaker. Because in year 12, they'll look at a conical flask and go, do I put it in that test tube? So the PR campaign that we've done in the past has kind of worked. But what will work better is that transition that's all about learning, looking at what students are doing in stage 3 and bringing that into that stage 4 concept.
Amy.
It's a challenge. It's not a difficulty. There's always going to be a challenge, but I think we need to frame it as a step to grow. A successful transition would see students confident, even excited about starting high school, ideally. But I think for me, just knowing that it's a safe place. If they know they're going there for a safe place, I think that's a successful transition. I know we don't have much time, but I think quickly, the early days need to be smooth. The successful transition, those early days, those early weeks are so crucial for engagement. I think that shows a lot of work at the high school, showing the kids around, encouraging them, validating this fear. Like I guarantee all the other 29 of them in that room, it's okay to go, yeah, it's a bit scary. Let's validate it, let's normalise it. And allowing friendships to develop, seeing friendships start to develop, I think is a successful transition. I had a student say to me yesterday, working with kids all day, Miss Amy, sometimes you have to get out of your comfort zone to grow a little bit. I was like, oh my gosh, I needed that. Yes, you do. So, and it's true. I think it's a scary time, but it's such a period of growth if we do it in the right way.
I just want to add my 2 cents in on this one because this is the crux of what I'm looking at. And when I was at Mary Ward Central School, I knew that it was successful for the students when they were referring to the different sites as their own learning areas. So yeah, today we're going to the Trade Training Centre to do whatever. We're going to be working with Mr. whoever was one of the secondary teachers, or the secondary teachers will be like, yeah, I'm working with year 1 today, we're doing science. When it was that natural flow between the 2 sites there, that's when I knew it was successful. The best part was when the community was referring to it as a central school again, not as a primary school and a high school, and that was how I knew when that transition was being effective through those levels.